Welcome everyone to today's Starts at 60 Masterclass with Cochlear. We're very excited. You can see that we have a fabulous group of panelists today. They are experts in their field and we're very excited to have them on board to explore the topic of why treating hearing loss can help you live your best life well into your 60s. And I'm very excited today to introduce Gerald Quigley. If you don't recognize Gerald, you will no doubt recognize his voice. He is a very well-known media health commentator, and we're really excited to have Gerald being your MC today. So Gerald, thank you very much, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Wendy, and welcome everybody. We're here today basically to celebrate World Hearing Day with Cochlear and Starts at 60. We've got three amazing panelists, and they are here to discuss hearing health and the importance of treating hearing loss as we age. I will introduce these panelists briefly just before each one comes in, but we're going to run through each panelist contributing, but more especially, we're here to answer questions and queries you have. And while we've got all these people in the one room, we're going to use their expertise very carefully and answer as many questions as we can. Our first panelist today is Caroline Reichard, who is a bimodal cochlear implant recipient. Now, Caroline was deaf in her left ear from childhood, but her resilience and determination and the transformative power of technology, it meant that at 62 years of age, she stands as a bimodal cochlear implant recipient. And Caroline, I'm happy to pass over to you, and please go ahead and welcome.
Thank you so much, Gerald, and hi to everybody. This is not something I do very often, and I am a little bit nervous, so please be patient with me. I am a 62-year-old wife, mother, grandmother, daughter, friend, and I'm living my best life. And to celebrate World Hearing Day, there's a lot I can contribute. I contribute to the hearing technology that exists today in the world, to the quality of the life that I'm living at the moment. My story, you can hear from my accent, I am from Ireland, grew up in a small village near Waterford. And I was deaf from a very early age, either birth or as a small child. And that brought a lot of challenges with it, whether in school or at sports or as a teenager in discos, probably a word you haven't heard in a long time, but going to discos. So, they were the challenges. But you know what? People are resilient. I was resilient, and you get on with it. I did go as a 17-year-old to Germany to do my undergraduate and met my husband there. We've been married 42 years and together 46 years. But back then, it was interesting because I hadn't really spoken about my single-sided deafness, my left ear being deaf. And it was interesting coming to that phase, learning a new language, studying. And my husband, of course, knew, and he was a great support. And we found lots of ways of getting around it. Those of you who have single-sided deafness will probably be nodding with me when you hear me say things like, we'd strategically, be 10 minutes early for a dinner and place yourself strategically clever, or you start lip reading, or you would nod, even you'd mimic the person opposite you if it was a very loud environment. So a lot of you will have had this experience. But what happened then was we had three beautiful children. We emigrated in 2002 to Australia, and we now are Australians, very proud Australians. In my mid-40s, things started to change. So it was gradual. It was very, very gradual. And it was really my husband. So I actually, when I was asked to do this masterclass, I asked my husband, my children, my grandchildren, and my friends to give me stories, feedback, so that I can give you the reality of my life, because it's not just I was affected. So my husband straight said, radio, television, because we loved listening to Frank Kelly in the morning when we were getting breakfast. And whoever went down first to put on the kettle, put on the radio. And the first row of the day would be, if I put on the kettle on the radio, he'd come in and say, oh my God, what? It's blaring. And if he put on the kettle and I came in, I'd say, are you gaslighting me? I can't hear that. You can't possibly. So that was our life, right? And it would be exactly the same in the with the television in the evening. And of course, everything in between, like I told you or I asked you. And these were things that I started to miss. And it made a grumbling in our relationship, a very good relationship. The children noticed I was pulling back, that I was not attending things as much as I used to. And they were getting worried. But it was really work. It was really my work where I couldn't avoid it. In meetings, I was hearing less and less. And I couldn't fill the gaps anymore. And I remember one particular day, I was business unit manager of an oncology team. So it was a job I loved and I was passionate about. I got up every morning loving life. But suddenly my love of life was getting stressful. I was exhausted at night. I was worried about going into meetings. And one particular day, I came out of that meeting and I realized I haven't heard half of that, what went on. And this was important that I heard. And I rang my husband. I was crying, and I'm not a crier. And I was really, really upset. And I rang him and he said, come home. And he said, I'm driving you. We're going to a hearing aid clinic. We're going there. You're going to be tested. We've got to get to the bottom of this. So we went, and I went in there crying. I have no idea why I was crying. I have no idea what the blockage was, but there was a blockage. I walked out of that clinic and I had near perfect hearing in what was my good ear that had been reduced. And I got information about a cochlear implant that I had the possibility of getting. So I had instant relief. I had instant hearing back to what was normal for me. It wasn't what a normal person had, but normal for me. And then I'm going to fast forward with Valentine's Day, seen an article in the newspaper about an ENT in New South Wales. She was New South Wales Woman of the Year. And in the article, it said about she was implanting cochlear implants. I made an appointment with her, and I had to wait about 6 months. So it was November. I saw her at the end of November. Within 5 minutes, she told me I was the perfect candidate for a cochlear implant. I was operated on less than a month later. I had switch on the 10th of January, and all the family came because it was such an amazing celebration. And the first word I heard were out of my husband's mouth, because that was the decision we made. And I can tell you that I was tested in February this year, and I have 98% hearing in quiet in that ear. So you're looking at a woman who was born single-sided deafness, who coped. But now I brush my teeth in the morning, I put on my ears, as the children say, my hearing aid and my cochlear implant, and I go and live my best life without ever having to think of anything else. And now I'm really taking part in every aspect of life. And I can tell you so many stories of what I do, but I haven't got enough time. But I think it's sufficient to say that tomorrow we're flying to Borneo, and I fly without any hesitation, because no matter what happens, I can have other problems, but hearing problems I don't have anymore. It's one thing less to worry about. So Gerald, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Caroline. I think we're all tearing up a bit after all of that. That was, and that is so typical of so many stories that we hear. And we might say they're inspirational, but these are everyday Aussies who just suddenly find their quality of life just doesn't come back a little bit. It comes back with a vengeance. And then you can make up for all those things that, and you're probably thinking to yourself, why didn't I do this before? Why didn't I investigate before? Yes, not that women are ever wrong, but sometimes, we just need to but terrific to have support of the family. Thank you. And thank you for your contributions. We've got lots of questions for you later on as well. Our second panelist is Dr. Andrew Chang, who is an ear, nose and throat surgeon. He specializes in ENT otology, and he's an hearing implant surgeon who specializes in pediatric and adult ENT conditions. Andrew, we are so lucky to have you on your busy schedule. So the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the kind invitation and kind introduction. Before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge the First Nations people in which this presentation is made. I'm from Brisbane, so the Turrbal and Jagera people, and pay my respect to the elders past, present, and emerging. I won't take too much time because I always find that things I say can be a little bit boring, particularly when it gets down to the technical side. My brief that I was given was to try to dispel some of the myths associated with the cochlear implant. It is a great innovation. We're very lucky to be living in a country where there is a care and a pathway, as well as support from the government in relation to cochlear implants. The reason I say that is that if a child is born without hearing today in Australia, he or she will be able to get a cochlear implant one way or the other. There is no barriers. There is no set means testing. Most of the time, we actually now spend more time to try to convince the parents that it is the thing to do, rather than actually sort of trying to get them through to candidacy. And that's similar for adults. In fact, I feel that adults have more barriers than they are for children. In introduction, I'm a pediatric and adult cochlear implant surgeon. I was very fortunate to spend my early formative years of my training at the Royal Victorian Eye Ear Hospital and the Bionic Ear Institute. That's when I first got to know about cochlear implants and was able to work with many amazing scientists as well as clinicians in Melbourne, and also, of course, got to live in Melbourne for 2 years. So that's not that's always a good thing. Then I did my training back in Brisbane. Then I went overseas, once again, very lucky, to University of Cambridge, the Addenbrooke campus, which has one of the largest cochlear implant unit in Europe. And that's where I'd get my fellowship as the senior clinical fellow in cochlear implant surgery. So most of us, by the time we finish our journey as a cochlear implant surgeon, we've been doing some sort of training, dragging our family around over various places and overseas for a good part of 10 to 15 years. I was lucky. I somehow managed to get through most of my requirements for my training within that 10-year period. And now I'm back in Brisbane and practicing here in Brisbane. So I don't have any conflict of interest. I'm not a paid speaker for any of the companies, and this presentation is done in my own time. I'm going to go through a very brief introduction. I always say to people, would you ever consider getting a bionic eye or a bionic arm or legs if you actually lose those functions? But unfortunately, there is no such a thing as bionic eye, and there is no such a thing as bionic egg or arm or leg. And the scale of the problem associated with hearing loss is that at least 1 in 6 Australians affected by hearing loss, and that number is expected to rise to 1 in 4 by 2050. And unfortunately, still in this day and age, about 90 to 95% are either not treated or they're actually not receiving any optimal treatment. And sadly, less than 10% of those people who may benefit from cochlear implant will get the treatment that's required. And that's often through a lack of awareness. They often get told that they're too old, that it's only for children, and that that the cost is too high, which none of those are actually true. So this graph just shows the scale of the problem. And we also know there's emerging evidence that hearing loss impairs and affects the cognitive function. It worsens dementia, or at least exacerbates its effect, creates social isolation and disengagement. And because you got this increased cognitive load, so it leads to mental fatigue, lack of concentration, and poor memory retention. And you don't enjoy your life as much because of it. So the technology for cochlear implant has been around for quite a while. This is Voltaire. Voltaire is a French scientist who managed to convince a group of people that if you stick a couple of electrodes between your head, you can actually stimulate the auditory center. We don't do that anymore. The device itself is TGA approved. It is manufactured to the highest standards. There are not many things these days that are man-made that will be guaranteed for the rest of your life. Essentially, that's what the cochlear implant is. And it's been around for over 40 years, and the technology is improving all the time. And also, it is MRI compatible. Lots of people get told that once you have a cochlear, you can't have an MRI, which is not true. So it usually comes in two parts. So on the picture on the right, it shows you what the external processor looks like. So there is the standard on-the-ear processor, which is to the left of the picture. And then there's the off-the-ear processor, which is to the right. And then there's the receiver stimulator, which is the actual implant itself. So the bit on the outside is actually not called the cochlear implant. The bit that we're putting on the inside is the cochlear implant. And this is what a standard cochlear implant looks like. It has the stimulating electrode and then the ground electrode. That's the circuit in there. And there is the magnet. And the tiny little array that you see is the bit that stimulates the cochlea to create sound. So you've imagined your cochlea as like a keyboard on the piano. Normally, when a sound wave comes through, it's bathed in this special fluid. And the fluid basically moves, creates a wave. The wave pushes down the keyboard of the cochlea, and then that gets transferred into sound. The cochlear implant works a bit different in that instead of having that sound wave coming through, it's electrically stimulated the nerve itself. This goes back to the genius of Dr. Graham Clark, who actually worked out that your cochlea is like, it's like the seashell that you see when you go for a walk along the beach. And we are very lucky as humans that it is actually organized in a frequency-based fashion. So you're able to stimulate individual parts of the cochlea to create sound. So generally speaking, it's not a long or involved surgery. Initial consultation takes about 45 minutes. Usually I try to get a good idea about your hearing loss and your use of hearing aids, any other hearing assistive devices, any major ear surgery. Generally try to get an idea of the functional status and any other comprehensive medical history and any medications. Talk about expectation. I encourage my patient to bring their spouse, partner, children, or a trusted friend. And I tend not to do too many tests other than the standard battery testing to see if the candidacy is fulfilled. And occasionally there will be scanning involved, MRI, CT, and I often will liaise with other specialists that may be involved in that person's care. By that time, you're still not ready for surgery. I usually like to see you again, review the history, discuss expectation, answer any questions you have about the surgery, and check that you are actually happy to go ahead and what device you have selected. And I'm a very small cog in a very large wheel. So there are many people that make this beautiful process happen, ranging from my very trusted audiologists that I work with to the theatre staff and the staff in recovery. It's usually an overnight hospital stay and then 1 week recovery at home. It is actually one of the safest surgery you can have. It is much safer than having knee replacement or hip replacement, and they get done on much higher frequency than cochlear implants. So usually involves the incision behind the ear, and then we create a surgical access to the cochlea. And the most beautiful part comes that when we make a little window in the cochlea and we put the electrode through into the cochlea, normally the device gets tested and during the operation to make sure that it is a functioning device. So we do some testing. We usually take an X-ray, and the X-ray should look like that. It looks like the electrode's in the right place. And then usually we turn it on in about 2 weeks. But the most important thing is that the regular and frequent use is the best way to get the full function out of your cochlea. So I think it is a growing issue. There are many potential cochlear implant candidates out there. The technology is improving, but I just want to emphasize it is very safe. It's safer than having a knee replacement. And I think most of us would be quite happy to have a knee replacement without thinking about what's actually involved. But sometimes we're quite hesitant about having a cochlear implant. And the long-term benefit is often carefully assessed and in the selected patients. Oftentimes, the health authorities will measure this thing called the quality of life index, and cochlear implant as a quality of life intervention ranks as high as putting a premature baby in neonatal intensive care and bring that premature baby home. So in terms of quality of life outcome, they are pretty much equal to one another. So that's something we should remember. It is actually, there's not many things we do in medicine that can improve quality of life to that extent. Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a very underestimated phrase, quality of life, isn't it? Quality of life. We saw it in Caroline's presentation, and you've backed that up. We welcome back to the stage now Tegan Keogh. Tegan is a clinical specialist audiologist, and she's privately practicing on the Sunshine Coast. In fact, the only privately practicing audiologist on the Sunshine Coast, and she has a PhD, which is an amazing qualification in this particular dynamic. Her practice is Hear Check, innovative, client focused, and Tegan, please, welcome.
So I wanted to firstly say listening to Caroline's story was, I guess, wonderful for me because I feel privileged in being able to work with people like Caroline every day of my life. I wanted to touch on some of the important things that she spoke about in her presentation, which was the signs of hearing loss. So one of the things that I see very routinely in my day-to-day life or as an audiologist is often it's the family that are the first port of call indicating that there is something not quite right with a family member's hearing. So I would say listen really carefully to your family. If they are saying you are missing things, if they are saying, didn't you hear me? That is definitely one of the biggest signs that you need to pay attention to. At that point, I sort of see a little bit of a misunderstanding or just maybe a little bit of a bias in our society with regards to hearing tests. I think it's really funny how we tend to get our eyes tested, and I note that 3 of the panel here today are wearing glasses. But we don't seem to acknowledge that it's important to get our hearing tested routinely. For some reason, hearing is often associated with some sort of stigma around it, which I personally don't understand. But I feel like hearing and getting your hearing tested should be just as routine as getting your eyes tested. So every 1 to 2 years, head off to your audiologist and have a hearing assessment. Hearing assessments are not difficult. They really only take about half an hour to an hour of your time. If you're a pensioner, you're actually entitled to hearing tests that are subsidised under the federal government program. And if you look up Independent Audiologists Australia, of which I am the current president of, you will find that that is an organisation that will support a whole list of audiologists across Australia. And these audiologists are bound by a very tight and strict code of ethics. That means they're going to not try and upsell you into anything. They're not on a retail model where they're, trying to sell you major products and devices. They're there to do more healthcare and more medical model care. And that's where I guess the journey should begin, getting a hearing test. During that process, there are different types of hearing loss. There are types of hearing loss to do with the middle ear and types of hearing loss to do with the inner ear or the Cochlear. And during that process, you can actually ask your audiologist which part of the hearing system is problematic for me. Now, during that process, you can also ask whether your hearing loss is mild, moderate, or severe or profound. So those different levels on the scale will also indicate the degree of difficulty that you'll have in your day-to-day life. So it's very important to know where you sit on that scale. In saying that, there are variables on that scale that really do indicate that a person might benefit from a cochlear implant. And the types of things that we often see as audiologists are when people have hearing loss, but their ability to hear clearly is compromised. So you can actually have a moderate hearing loss and hear clearly or not clearly. And it's the ones who are not hearing or don't have that clarity of hearing when tested formally by an audiologist that will struggle and be the first indicator that perhaps a cochlear implant assessment is really important. So I think that's a question that you should really be asking your audiologist when you visit. I would, again, I'm stressing the word audiologist here. I do feel that if you're looking at this pathway, it's important to see a university-trained qualified audiologist. We all have master's degrees, and I think that's really important, heading to one of those people that have those master's degrees, rather than heading to, say, a retail chain that you see necessarily advertised on TV. So I think once you have that assessment, a hearing assessment involves us looking in your ears. It involves us, of course, putting headphones on your ears, doing a simple test where you push a button, but then doing a number of other tests to assess that clarity. And that clarity is really key, and that speech understanding is really key to determining whether you'd be eligible for a cochlear implant. Cochlear implant journey from that point, kind of splits pathways where you head off to the ENT as well as off to an audiologist. And we work, I guess, synchronously in that. Of course, the ENT does the surgery, and then we see you shortly after to do the work of switching the cochlear implants on and making sure you get through that rehabilitation process that performs or supports you to hear clearly over time. It's a really unique process, and it's something that I certainly, again, feel really privileged to be involved in. So yeah, I'll leave it there because I'm sure there's lots of questions at the end, and I want to make time to answer specifically those questions.
Thank you, Tegan. And it's remarkable, in my view, as an outsider looking in, how each of the three of you, have complemented the other, and yet fill gaps that sometimes arise in your mind when one of you was speaking. So well done. Now, we have got lots and lots and lots of questions. And I'll direct a question to a particular individual based on your expertise. But if you really want to put your hand up and say, please just go ahead if you've got a comment. So, Andrew, the first one to you is from Margot, and thank you, Margot. Why is there a link between hearing loss and dementia? And remember, there was that big study that came out recently, and certainly in the field I work in, which is trying to keep people as well as they possibly can, the fear of dementia-related illness is right up there with Australians as that ageing population just continues to increase. So is there a link, Andrew?
There is a link, but I just want to emphasize it's not a causation. That doesn't mean that if you have hearing loss, you will get dementia. There are several reasons why there's all the big population study, especially the recent one from Canada, but they're also doing one in Europe and as well as in the UK, does show that if your hearing loss is not optimally treated, then it makes the dementia worse. There are some of the reasons for that. First one is that a lot of the tools that we use to test dementia doesn't actually take into account of your hearing loss. So if you've got a hearing loss, it is expected that you will do worse on those dementia screening tools. The other reason is that you are less likely to be engaged with your social and your environment. So a lot of times when you have a hearing loss, you are less likely to be engaged with your family, your friends, and you lose those opportunities to actually also therefore engage your cognitive function. And it is that sort of good old adage that if you don't use it, you will lose it. But also hearing loss is also a general sort of thing, like Tegan was saying, that, because you have this hearing loss, it's probably an indicator that there are other health issues that are going on in your life, which you may not actually have adequately addressed. So sometimes it is actually good to actually go and see your local audiologist as that first step into actually creating a better wellness for yourself, other than, looking at specifics of the hearing loss, for example.
Okay. It is surprising, isn't it? The mini mental score is all about memory. It's got nothing to do with hearing or any of the other issues. So thank you. Deborah asks, and this is coming to you, Tegan, how do you decide which hearing device is the right one? And is there a concern on cost? But I think you answered that pretty well by making sure you see an audiologist who's not going to upsell.
Yeah, I think that's really, really key and really critical here. I think, in my opinion, if you're a great audiologist, you should be able to fit a great hearing aid, no matter, or fit a hearing aid in a really excellent and professional manner, regardless of the cost. The other thing I do want to say, though, is that they are medical grade devices. And quite often we, buy these lovely things at, when we look at the cost of these, they're about $2,000-ish kind of dollars sometimes, or, $1,500. We have to remember that sometimes we need to pay a little bit because of those types of things, because it is a high technology device. Hearing aids range in cost very broadly. So again, I would be looking for a local independent, because you're not going to have a company that's sort of pushing up marketing, or, using all their dollars on marketing, and you're going to support locally owned and operated businesses. But the other thing I think we all need to be clear of is when we're purchasing hearing aids, we're also often the cost of the hearing aid is bundled in with the expertise of the audiologist. So a lot of people think the hearing aid might be expensive, but if they actually unpack it, sometimes we might see a patient 5 or 6 times in that journey, and that includes the time of the audiologist in the cost. I think it would be more transparent if we tease that out. But, ask when you go to see an audiologist, does this include your time, or is that an add-on? And, really value their time. Right. I do want to put out just quickly that if we are looking at, say, a $5,000 set of hearing aids for 2, that would average out about $20 a week. And I do think it's important, when we think about the cost of a meal or some coffees out, $20 a week for our communication is priceless. And, not that I'm advocating for spending ridiculous amounts of money, but I do think we need to be cautious in that space and make sure we are valuing communication.
And as Andrew has mentioned, if we average that cost out for how many extra years we're going to be living and standing upright, based on that and the improved quality of life, it's a small price to pay.
Absolutely.
Coming back to you again, Tegan, Gladys asked, how do I broach the topic with someone who doesn't believe that they have hearing loss? Almost a psychological question.
This one is very tricky because there is a lot of psychology in the background with this one. And I'm thankful every day that I have a psych degree. I guess one of the things to consider when you are broaching it with family is that, you are actually, or you're listening to your family, but if you are a family member, perhaps what you could do is offer to say some sentences with that person's eyes closed, with that family member's eyes closed, and see if the family member can repeat it. And that's, or stand behind them and see if they can repeat instructions behind them. I mean, that's it's not a very gentle way to do things, but sometimes those home hitting moments are what somebody needs to just get them to see an audiologist and simply have a hearing health check. And I think Caroline might need to say something in this case because she's definitely walked this pathway.
Yes.
Thanks, Tegan. I definitely think it's like with anything that's sensitive. If your partner or your child says to you, I really need to talk to you, and then you let it pause, and then you say, I actually need to talk to you about something that I've really observed and it's really impacting me. So you take it and more the emotional side, because in the end, that was one thing that I can't underestimate, the impact on the family and friends when they see you, as Andrew said, going back into isolation because you feel you can't contribute, but also the little needling rows that can happen or the misunderstandings. So I think if you just really go to that person and say, I really need to talk to you about something that's very important to my heart, and can I talk to you about it? In that moment, they have a different disposition, and I think they will see that it's coming from a good place.
That's great. It is very sensitive, obviously. Andrew, Tanya asks you, can my hearing loss come back to read to what it might be? And I'm assuming Tanya is saying perhaps after surgery and no interventions, will it come back? But what do you think?
There are many different type of hearing loss. In terms of the type of hearing loss that we are talking about specific to cochlear implant, it is often progressive. So if you leave it long enough, gradually all the functional hearing will be gone. In terms of the hearing loss, the other side of the question is that a lot of people are worried that they may lose their natural hearing when they have their cochlear implant. And to a large extent, that is true. In saying that, the natural hearing they have by the time they have a cochlear implant is not functional hearing. So they can hear background noises, they may be able to hear certain environmental sounds, but those things are not really that interpretable for them. I always find it surprising, and Caroline can probably have a better sort of backup to this. The first thing a lot of my cochlear implant recipients say to me when they come back to see me after they switch on is that they can hear things like the bird chirping, how loud the flushing of the toilet is, and how loud the how loud the tap is. Just little things that normal hearing population appreciate. That's just slowly going out over time for those people with hearing loss. So I think that's really important to sort of think about.
Tegan, Leonora asks, can hearing loss occur over a short space of time? And if so, what might be some of the underlying causes?
Yes, hearing loss can occur in a short space of time, and often audiologists don't discuss causation, so I don't want to step on Andrew's toes here. But I do, and I think he'll back me up in or be able to support some of these. But we do see sudden losses with certain types of viruses, and we do see sudden losses with certain types of disorders like Meniere's disease. Andrew, I'm going to pass this one over to you because I feel like you probably need to expand on this one, potentially.
Thanks, thanks, team. They are many causes. Most of the majority of it is sort of progressive hearing loss over time. Sometimes we do see ones where it is post-infection. Sometimes we do see this thing called a sudden onset hearing loss without any obvious cause. But I think the important thing, as Tia mentioned in her presentation, is that if you do have concern, then it is important to have it tested and investigated.
And I think, can I just add, just with sudden losses, it's really important to get to an audiologist quickly. They're your major advocate when there is a loss. They will hook you up to, an ear, nose and throat specialist or to your GP for quick and fast treatment potentially, and they'll monitor you. So it's, I think, really treating sudden hearing loss like you've lost your eyesight should be, priority.
Sure, they treat it as serious.
Yes.
Tegan, at what age should you have a routine hearing tests? A question put by Annette.
Any age. We often see, I think children should have their hearing tested at sporadic points along the school pathway. But I think, if we look at the research, around 50% of people over the age of 50 have hearing loss. So, in my life, I get my eyes tested routinely. I get my hearing tested routinely. It's absurd that we look after one, but not the other. And I think we should just, once we're at 50, we should definitely be having those routine hearing assessments. And we should be getting in early. Just like eyesight, you want to make sure that you're seeing the world. You really do want to make sure you're hearing all aspects of the world and not misinterpreting people's tone or the way that they speak. So I do feel like it's really important from age 50 at minimum to start having those regular checks every two years or so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Andrew, Joan asks, and you've answered this in some way already. Her daughter has significant hearing loss and has had that for 20 years due to a viral infection. Beside hearing devices, is there anything else that can be done? And she sounds like she's a candidate pretty well.
Yes, I agree. Assuming that she has been using her hearing aid over that period of time, then it potentially would have come to a time that she would need to consider a cochlear implant in terms of addressing that hearing loss. I often will say to a lot of my potential cochlear implant patients, you don't wake up one day and say, oh, actually, I need to get a cochlear implant. Usually they have this long history of struggles with their hearing, struggling with communication. And then it comes to a point where, yes, that's the transition point in which that at the time that they've done everything they could, but then they need something else extra, which is the cochlear implant on top of that. So if there is further concern, then she should get it assessed. And the other thing is having an assessment for cochlear implant does not mean that you are going to get a cochlear implant. Having an assessment for the cochlear implant actually provides you with a lot of information about what your current hearing status is. So you actually end up getting more understanding of your hearing loss and strategies to overcome it than before. Even if you don't end up getting a cochlear implant.
Okay, but it's all about assessment, basically, isn't it? You've got to put a line in the sand to see where you are. Tegan, this is a question from Peggy and perhaps a comment from you, Caroline. Peggy's been wearing hearing aids for 19 years, and she is still struggling, in capital letters, to hear in groups. What should she do?
First of all, I think she should head back to her audiologist just to make sure that her hearing aids are actually optimized and doing what they should be doing. And I think that she should also be talking to her audiologist about whether she is a candidate for cochlear implant assessment. I really want to reinforce what Andrew said. There are many assessments that we do where we go, okay, you're not quite a candidate for cochlear implantation yet, but here's the steps. Here's what we're going to do to manage this. And here's how we're going to support you over the next few years. We can see that perhaps in a few years, you may be a candidate. What can we do right now to support you until that occurs? And Caroline, I'd love to hear what you say on this one too.
Yeah, thank you, Tegan. What I can tell you from my experience is that my hearing in my good ear didn't stay the same. So it was a gradual decline as well, and it's still declining. There's no known causation for it. We don't know. It might be genetic. But to your point, Tegan, about going for the regular checkups, I go for regular checkups now because I wanted to have it checked every year. And every year she's had to adjust my hearing aids to make it address whatever hearing loss I've just had. So back to the question, I think the person needs urgently to go back to their audiologist and I think that would be the first step, and then they can see from there.
One of the first external signs people start to focus on their ears is when they get tinnitus. And I have a couple of questions about tinnitus. And Tegan, Anna asks, is tinnitus a pathway to hearing loss? And Rodney asks, and perhaps Andrew, a comment from you, I can hear, but I can't make out words as I have tinnitus. So obviously that background noise is really worrying him. So Tegan, if you could go first.
Absolutely. So when we talk about tinnitus, you can get tinnitus spontaneously. So that means you're walking through a shopping centre one day and you hear a little burst of noise in your ear. That's what we call spontaneous tinnitus. Then we can also get tinnitus where, we might have been exposed in my era to maybe a couple of loud concerts or some nightclubs, and we come out and our ears are roaring with tinnitus, but that subsides for the next couple of days. And then we get tinnitus that, remains and is really impactful to our life because it's there most of the time unless there is noise in our day-to-day life cancelling it out. Usually it's that type of tinnitus that is associated with hearing loss. If you have tinnitus, again, we do encourage you to have an audiological assessment, again, to work out what's going on, what type of tinnitus it is. There are some types of tinnitus that can indicate more serious conditions, so it's important to have that assessment. And usually when somebody is reporting, ongoing tinnitus, it goes hand in hand with hearing loss. You don't usually have one at that stage without the other. If you can't hear clearly because of your tinnitus, then look, more than likely you have some degree of hearing loss. That hearing aids or some sort of type of device would actually be very, very helpful for you. I know there was a study where, and I can't remember who actually did this study, but I know 97.5% of patients actually do better with tinnitus, with hearing aids in terms of managing their tinnitus over time. So it is an important part of the rehab process, and it's important to stimulate those nerve endings and, hear the right thing in your day-to-day communication.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, did you have a comment on that from a tinnitus perspective?
Yes, thank you. I agree with what Tegan just said. It is actually an indicator that, once again, you need an assessment, because especially in the presence of not being able to actually hear speech clearly with your tinnitus, it tells me that there is a hearing loss. And a shopping center booth test is not a hearing test. So if you walk past a shopping center, someone say coming for a free hearing test, and then they give you 2 lines, that doesn't actually mean anything. That's exactly that. It does not mean anything. You need to go to a qualified audiologist, sit in a standardized booth, and get the hearing assessed properly. Yeah. Because if you come and see me with that, I'll still send you back to Tegan and say, you need to have a proper hearing test done.
Yes, the opportunities for shopping centre medical assessments continue to thrive. A lifestyle question here from Emiliana, which probably concerns us all. What measures can we do to keep our environment safe from offensive noise that can lead to hearing impairment? It's an ongoing issue, isn't it? That's the noise of everyday environment. Any thoughts?
Well, I recently had a pool pump that my husband got his mobile phone out. He downloaded a sound level meter app, and then he took the phone out to the pool pump, stood a metre away from the pool pump, and did a measurement of the noise from the pool pump. And that was the first indicator that, in fact, that pool pump was too noisy and was generating far too much noise, and we needed to replace the pump. So I think there are lots and lots of free sound level meter apps that you can download, and anything over that 80 dB mark is considered noise that could be potentially harmful over any, length of duration. So I do feel like, that's the first step. There are lots of government regulations around noise, particularly these days in pubs and clubs and, busy environments. But, I certainly know I went to the movies the other day, got my sound level meter app when I was watching an action movie, and thought, oh, that's peaking quite high. But because it peaks and then drops back down, it actually is quite safe. So I'll leave that with the others if they would like to comment.
Any other comments? Do you find exterior noise, Caroline, still worries you? Are you more aware of it now? You probably are.
Yeah, I think I've been aware of it even as even a child, a teenager. I always tended to avoid very loud noises, and I still do. And we were just recently at a concert. Paul McCartney, very good. And we actually put protection in our ears, and we did still enjoy the concert. So that's something that I do because I have experienced a severe hearing loss, and I want to keep what I have.
Can I just add to that?
Yes, of course.
That when you actually lose your hearing, you actually also lose your tolerance to loud sounds. So you get what we call a smaller dynamic range. So if you find that you're in an environment where you're actually experiencing, a pain or intolerance to loud sounds, and other people who are around you, perhaps who don't have hearing loss, are not reporting the same level of discomfort, that in itself is an indicator for having a hearing assessment.
Andy, I'm always Tegan. Sorry, I'm always puzzled when I walk each day. The number of people who wear these earbud things. Do they do any damage?
Actually, it's very interesting. I've been an audiologist for 23 years now, and I'm starting to see some young people walk through my doors who are heavy gamers, and they're gaming in ways that involves explosive noise or, gunfire through their headphones. And yes, I'm actually seeing hearing loss related to gaming and headphone use, yes. So it's important to keep the headphones about 2/3 of maximum and give your ears lots of breaks, particularly if you are doing a lot of gaming.
That could be an interesting discussion over the dinner table tonight in some of our people that are watching us. Andrew, Brian asks, do hearing devices diminish natural hearing capabilities?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I do get asked that question a lot. I've been to my audiologist. They said I need hearing aids, but I'm worried that my hearing aids will damage my hearing. The short answer today is no. In fact, it actually aids the hearing, because we know from lots of experiments that's been done, when you have the right sound, as Tegan said, the right sound coming through into your inner ear, the little nerve ending actually produces certain factors. So these are proteins that basically keeps the nerve ending healthy and alive. So having a well-fitted, well-adjusted hearing aids do exactly that. And that's been very well documented in terms of experiments that's been done all around the world, in that they are able to put the right sound and promote the actual growth of the nerve ending and keep those nerve ending going to the right places. So yeah, no, having hearing aids do not damage your hearing.
Now, Tegan, I don't know if you're a marriage counsellor, but Lucy asks, my husband shouts continuously. Could he be losing his memory?
Memory or hearing?
Well, Lucy says hearing, but it's probably a combination of both those. Yes, it's hearing.
Yeah. So
although she does note he has memory problems as well.
Yeah. So when you lose your hearing, what I tend to see in my offices is that people do one of two things. When you lose your hearing, it's very difficult to moderate your voice. So some people, either their voices get very loud, and they're very unaware that they're speaking quite loudly. And in other people, they're conscious and they can't moderate and hear their own voice, so they get very soft. It's usually one of two ways. So if somebody has a raised voice, that is definitely a conversation to broach about having a hearing assessment. And certainly what I find is when people do have declining hearing, they're very unaware of it themselves, because you don't know what you miss, right? When you have your hearing declining, I see this all the time where, people's hearing loss is deteriorating. They might walk away from the group. The group says something, but they either mishear it or don't hear it at all. So in that way, we would expect that if somebody isn't getting the right message from their hearing, they're going to not store it correctly in their memory, and particularly not over the long term. So yeah, in that way, hearing does definitely affect your memory as well.
Ingrid and others have expressed concern that they were busy at 10 o'clock today. So Ingrid and others, there will be a video uploaded to Starts at 60 YouTube channel, and all of you who have registered will be notified when that is available to watch. Now, I think we've scratched the surface today, and we could go on for an hour because there's a lot of other questions. But the important thing is, if you need more questions, you can visit www.cochlear.com. We've got lots of questions we didn't get to answering, the ones you submitted, but if the Cochlear engagement team will be able to supply you with answers. And there will be a slide coming up with the contact details, but the phone number is 1-800-875-212, 1-800-875-212. The SMS message is 4472 43454. In Australia, it's a +61. And the email is hearinghelp, all one word, hearinghelp, lowercase, @cochlear.com. Could I, on behalf of everyone who has registered today, thank Caroline, Andrew, and Tegan for their time, and especially for their expertise. You've been able to fill, I think, a lot of gaps or concerns that people have in their hearing. But I guess the take-home message that I've found is if the dentist can contact you regularly, and the eye specialist or the optician can, and even your pharmacist can about repeat prescriptions, then it's time to have regular hearing checks. So thank you, and special thanks to Starts at 60. Have a wonderful Monday.
Thank you, everyone. Fantastic.
Thank you.